Welcome to the Imaginaries.
Hello, and welcome to the moon, aka the Imaginaries. What just happened?
I thought you said the moo.
Oh, no, the moon.
The moon? What?
Welcome to the moon.
We're going to the moon today?
We're going to the moon today. Well, we're going to many moons today, actually.
Oh.
We're going to our moon, the moon, Luna, and we are going far beyond our moon to many moons, both moons that exist and moons that don't exist.
I'm really sorry because I have known the subject of today's podcast for, well, like 6 hours. And I still actually literally thought you said moo.
Oh, well, you know. The cow jumped over the moon, so there are cows involved with moon stuff or something. Let's go with that.
Okay.
All right, so today, as you can probably already guess, we are going to talk about lunar societies in science fiction and fantasy, mostly science fiction, and what lunar societies allow us to do or give to us that other futuristic societies don't. Regardless of where they're situated. And I say futuristic societies because when we're talking about lunar societies, whether it's our moon or some other moon, we are typically talking about science fiction that goes into the future. Whether that's 15 minutes to, the first moon base established on the moon to full working societies on our moon, on the moons of other planets in our solar system, or of moons in solar systems that we haven't yet discovered. So, is there something about the moon as a setting that makes us loony for science fiction?
Well, I was going to ask you, Tony.
Yes.
Are we conducting this week's podcast in a vacuum? Because we foresee it as the first of a multi-part series.
We do. So you're looking at you're listening to us talk about lunar societies today, but we're going to talk about planetary societies, other planetary societies. I'm not really sure how to say that, but we're going to take Mars as kind of the example in science fiction, but then also look at how colonization societies on other planets besides Earth are treated separately from lunar societies and societies on moons. And then as a potential third part to the series, we're going to think about how Earth is treated in the future. Treated and mistreated, I should say, because there are some pretty strong mistreatments going on in science fiction and fantasy. But this is definitely going to be the first of a series, whether that's a series of 2 or 3 or more parts, we can't say. But welcome to the moon again.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. For context, my name is Kendra.
So it is.
And your name was?
Tony.
Yes, yes it was. So, we have quite the show notes today. We're pretty excited about this podcast.
Yeah.
We only settled on today's theme recently, but we have been thinking about this larger conversation of what it means to set something on the moon versus what it means to set something on Mars versus what it means to set a moon somewhere. So, yes, I have the power of God. To set a scene or a colony somewhere else, like Earth or, exoplanet, like actual exoplanets outside of our solar system.
Right.
So we've been thinking about this for a while, and the first thing that stuck out to me, and I kind of was wondering if this is where you were headed with your introduction. The first thing that stuck out to me was that we don't set many colonies on the moon.
Right.
Anymore.
Yes.
So.
Right, and that's something that you had noted in our notes, that if you go back and look at earlier science fiction, if you're looking at Jules Verne, or Arthur C. Clarke, or H.G. Wells, or Isaac Asimov, and I'm just literally tossing off names that we put in our show notes, we had a lot of lunar settings, a lot of cities on the moon, a lot of colonies on the moon, a lot of first stepping stone to solar system or interplanetary or intergalactic societies, beginning with the moon. And in a lot of recent science fiction, that's gone away. And the examples that we did come up with of contemporary science fiction that is set predominantly or importantly on the moon, there really isn't much. Like, we've talked about Ian McDonald's Luna series before, Luna New Moon and Luna Wolf Moon, but those are exceptional because they are some of the very few that exist now. And my idea was that you saw a drop-off in interest with the moon once people had actually visited the moon. And once...
So kind of like blasé, we've been there, done that.
Yeah, a little bit, right.
Moving
like, the mystery was gone. Like, people had visited it, and obviously, like, a few astronauts landing on the moon was not that exciting, and I don't mean to take away from that accomplishment, but, like, you know, what they found there were not lunar monsters. What they found there were not aliens. What they found there were not things that people had really seriously thought there would be for, at that point, decades, at least. But at the same time, it was kind of flat, gray nothingness. And, like, seeing Earth from a different perspective, yes, doing the science that they did, accomplishing what they did, all important, all good things. But they took away some of that excitement that instilled the science fiction up to that point. And so my contention is that you saw a shift then to another kind of exciting primary other that wasn't the moon anymore.
So this is other with a capital O.
Yes.
I'm assuming.
Yes.
Which, you know, this could provide some interesting parallels to previous podcasts we've done about the alien and the monsters as other. We've mentioned, too, the female as other, and at some point we'll probably discuss, like, all female worlds. Like, the word for world is grass.
Forest.
No.
Yeah. The word for world is forest.
That's it. Oh my goodness. I said grass because that's another book she wrote. Yes.
Yep.
You know, so female-centric societies, the female body is other, et cetera, et cetera. We keep coming back to this notion of other, which I find really fascinating and cool.
Right.
And in the context of the moon, in my case, a little unexpected. Like, I can see the connections now that you've drawn them. But how did we get there?
Yeah, that's...
Is it other anymore?
Right, and I think that that's a really good place to start thinking about it, because it's hard to sort of disengage from this long and complex cultural history with the moon. Like, it's been there for, well, obviously for much, much, much longer than there have been human societies or human culture. But because it's there, because it's in the sky, because it's so large, because it's so changing, like, you know, it kind of has to play a role in story and the development of story and myth. And obviously when we get to science fiction and actually begin to think scientifically through our fiction about what's on the moon, what kind of crazy but vaguely plausible with our understandings at the time kind of societies and worlds can we imagine. The moon, you know, it opens up so many possibilities for everything that the Earth isn't or can't be or could be only an opposite. And then, again, once people start to get a better sense of what's on the moon, working up through actually visiting the moon, you know, I think our moon loses maybe a little bit of that otherness, but the concept of moon, whether it's archetypal, whether it's mythical, doesn't necessarily. And I think that some of that we'll talk about in our Mars podcast, because some of that gets transferred to Mars, but our moon is by no means the only moon in science fiction. And I think that other moons still have kind of a little bit of that mystical otherness. Like, that they're not planets, they're not Earth, so what are they? They can be things that Earth and new planets cannot be.
It's true. It's true. They do seem to occupy a pretty unique niche. Mm-hmm. In that, I mean, I'm thinking about, perhaps not lunar colonies, but I'm thinking about Endor in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Pretty significant moon that couldn't have worked functionally in the storyline if it had been the planet itself, because the entire main action sequence of episode 6 of Star Wars relies upon this, battle station trying to get in orbit around the planet so it can actually target the moon.
Yeah.
So the tension is built by it being a moon. It couldn't have, functionally that plot line, the attack on Endor, would not have worked if it had been the primary planet.
Yeah.
Which I find pretty interesting. So maybe it's just a hijink, maybe it's just a clever little trick for cinematic purposes, but it still does something that that non-satellite objects couldn't do.
Yeah, right, because you could see that sequence. I mean, that could easily be that the planet is, if Endor is a planet instead of a moon, that planet is behind its sun, or that planet is being shaded by another planet, or, something. Like, it didn't necessarily have to be a moon.
Yeah, but it would have taken more work, I think,
right. No, I agree with you.
Other than they did it, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's important, that what you're saying, that Endor was a moon, that even if it's just a small thing, even if it's just, kind of a story feasibility thing, making it a moon does something that putting a planet behind a sun or putting a planet behind another planet doesn't do.
It's true. And, oh man, I mean, you could contrast it to the destruction of Alderaan, for example. There's something very final about the stamping out of Alderaan. Like, there goes the planet and its moons, which, by the way, Alderaan had colonized moons. Fun fact, they were spice mines.
Oh.
I discovered that while digging through the Star Wars databank when I was 12. But Endor, it wouldn't be the end of the rebellion if Endor was taken out. It would be bad.
Right.
But it wouldn't be the end of the rebellion.
Yeah.
And that also does something, I think. It leaves a door open for future storylines. There's all kinds of things that making it a moon instead of a planet do. It just feels less final, right. I guess, in my opinion.
So, speaking of that, so you had raised the interesting point that the moon, and moons in general, as settings in science fiction, if we're looking at works that are more contemporary, so say, the last couple decades, maybe the last several decades, when we encounter moons, they tend to be in more fantastical science fiction. Star Wars is a good example. And maybe not even fantastical, but maybe more like allegorical or science fiction whose novum, which is, again, that central new idea that we've talked about on the podcast before, is something that's more associated with a social science, like science fiction that's focused on government or how people are interacting, more so than on technology or exploration.
It's true.
So what I find interesting about The Dispossessed is it's kind of taking this old idea of the moon as other, the moon and Earth as like a duality, and recasting it just not as Earth and moon, but as planet and moon completely differently. Which is a really interesting move, given that The Dispossessed is all about that transgression of politics and thinking things through to their logical conclusions and realizing that some things suck no matter what. And it's been a little while since I've read it, so this is, these are my takeaways years after reading it for the most recent time. But this idea of presenting this yin-yang kind of scenario that Ursula K. Le Guin does in The Dispossessed, I actually think that would not work if the main character did not grow up on a moon, if the anarchists had not chosen to go to a moon, if there was no settling back into the society on the planet from the moon. Like, the fact that there is that distinction, but that planet and moon are a system, I think that's important.
I agree, in part because we've seen the anarchist experiment writ large in science fiction for a while. And we've seen capitalism versus anarchy versus, whatever other kind of guiding social construct. Do you call it a social construct? I don't even know. Or a primary social organization tool or system of government. We've seen that done before, and perhaps better, like in earthbound settings. But what the Dispossessed allows us to do is examine facets of anarchism that aren't able to be explored in an earthbound system where everything is so deeply entrenched in human history, like the history of earthbound civilizations.
Yeah.
So you can cut off some of those ties. You can take away some of the really deeply complicated backstory that's deeply enmeshed in race politics and gender politics and other things like that, and hold it up to the light and examine it in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah.
I think that that's what makes the moon part of the Dispossessed unique.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's... So, let's disentangle things a little bit at this part, because what we have looked at so far, whether we're thinking of Earth's moon or another moon entirely, we're kind of thinking of moon as setting. And conflating that with moon as symbol. And I think that it's interesting to think about something that goes beyond either of those when the moon or a moon has a role in a science fictional story, but it's neither a setting nor a symbol. It's actually something, physical out there in space, and it's doing something within the story. Yeah. And what the different things it can do might be. And where I'm going with this...
Wait. Before you go there... Spoiler alert.
Yes.
This touches on spoilers for a certain series that we do love and talk about frequently, which is N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth series.
Yes.
So if you have not yet finished Broken Earth, skip ahead 5 minutes.
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
So this pertains to the second and the third books. We learn about it in the second, but it's a larger plot point in the third. And I think, without going too much into the plot details, the fact that characters are dealing with a moon in a really eccentric orbit around the planet on which the books are set, whether that's a far future Earth or not, is something that we have talked about in the past and may talk about in the future. But the fact that a moon is essentially degrading in its elliptical orbit, may eventually impact the Earth. I mean, as an object, it is a threat. It is something that the characters have to deal with. It's driving the plot forward. It's driving character development because the characters have to figure out actually what to do about the moon. So it kind of serves the same function as an asteroid or another impactor if you're thinking of 90s movies like Armageddon or Deep Impact. And yet, again, the fact that it's a moon, that it's specifically called out as a partner to this planet, even though it's a really eccentric partner, it does something different than just saying, it's an asteroid that's had a lot of near misses or something like that. And
Sure.
I keep saying this, like, it does something different or it is important. And eventually I want to, dig into what is important about it, what is different about it. So what do you think? Why the moon in Broken Earth? Why a moon in Broken Earth?
Well, I think Broken Earth in this particular context is part of a larger body of literature where the moon is an impactor. You have Titan AE.
Yeah.
You have Oblivion, the movie. It especially seems to be a cinematic thing, but it does occasionally show up in the literature as well. And I think this kind of goes back to what I said about the moon and the planet and finality.
Mm-hmm.
There is something particularly, maybe even Shakespearean, about the moon and the earth impacting each other.
Mm-hmm.
So destroy the moon, it's not a final thing. Civilization endures, it might be kind of hard, etc., etc. But put the earth and the moon, or a earth and a moon on a collision course, and what you have is a part of yourself that is coming back to destroy you. And that is very... Is that Freudian? Or is that Jungian? I don't even know. It's like a
some kind of
archetypal It's like the father and the son. It's Oedipal. It's something kind of primal. It's primal.
Yes.
It's mythological. The notion of the thing that you've given birth to, which is a part of most, lunar mythologies. It's the child of the earth, daughter, son, father, whatever, grandparent. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It is somehow, it has familial ties to the earth. Yeah. And so the impact of these two objects together is a familial conflict. It's archetypal, it's primal, it's not like this little hunk of space dust that got spun off of another star somewhere and happens to cross paths with us and, blow us out of the sky unsuspectingly. That's a different storyline. It doesn't have the same sort of deep, dramatic sort of implications. Mm-hmm. I mean, it has other dramatic implications, like we're gone. Right. But, I'm pretty sure Elon Musk has that sorted out, apparently. So.
Hopefully. One hopes.
One hopes. I have my doubts.
Yeah, right.
But so I think there's something, too, about how, the moon is not considered a candidate for settlement.
Yeah.
It's like this thing that we gave birth to, or that is somehow tied to us in familial links, that is dead and barren. And that, too, has, emotional implications, whereas, Mars is seen as a candidate for settlement.
Right.
And as long as a place is a candidate for settlement, that it can support human life without undue outside contributions of material or whatever, then that's not going to be the same proposition, question mark? I'm rambling.
No, but you're rambling, and I think that makes sense, especially when you were saying that, I'm thinking of the moon going back, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years as a symbol of fertility, a symbol of growth, and how that can be in science fiction, how fertility and growth can kind of be subsumed by or suborned to colonization, which has a whole other kind of connotation, which is not really along the same lines as growth and fertility. And, and how those two things kind of have had an awkward history with science fiction set on the moon, because a lot of those works that were set on the moon were, and I say were because I'm thinking of, writing up through the lunar landings, when a lot of science fiction was being put out by, the white straight guys who were the only ones who could get science fiction published at the time. And how that is a really interesting... The moon itself has such an interesting history, and how I'm actually really glad that we're seeing things like Ian McDonald's work now, because it's kind of adding some of that rich history, that rich symbolism back into the moon, saying there's still a lot here that we can do. I also want to give a shout out to, and I can't believe that I didn't think of this until right now, The Moon and the Other, which is one of the books that I've read this season, and is very possibly one of my favorite books of 2017. And again, it is new. Like Ian McDonald's Luna Wolf Moon, it has been released. It was released within the last 12 months. So I'm hoping that maybe we're seeing a resurgence in the moon as less kind of, the view of capitalism that is the gross little scum child of old science fiction that was coming out of the kind of colonization that goes to new places and subjugates people and kills them and gets rid of Aboriginal folks, and less of that and more of some sort of really interesting breakdown of what it means to settle in a place that maybe has this really complex history, but otherwise is not really a place that is all that hospitable to humans. And to make it so, it needs a lot of work. And what sort of baggage do humans bring with them? And Ian McDonald's Luna series gets into that, and the moon and the other gets into that, and I'm interested. What do you think?
Well, I'm thinking perhaps you talked earlier and eloquently about how your straight white middle-aged male authors of Western extraction saw the moon as a land of possibility. Well, perhaps it's because it's easier to imagine a white, hetero, in many ways Western normative world when you subtract the complications of human history.
Yeah.
So you can project that more easily on an othered space like the moon and like Mars, and we'll get to Mars eventually, but you can project it more easily there than you could, say, in a post-apocalyptic Earthbound setting. You know, you wipe the slate clean, or you choose a completely clean slate for a reason.
Right.
And I think the reasons that we have chosen the moon over the years may have changed. And you're right that Ian McDonald is doing something different. And I have yet to read John Kessel's The Moon and the Other, so I'll bump that a little further up my list. But, you know, I think maybe we're reframing the moon and we're realizing, you know what, it's not a place to conveniently extrapolate just our kind of people. Yeah. It's also a great place to conduct these social experiments that are intersectional and representative of Earth as is, you know? And that goes for the Expanse, too. And the way that the Expanse treats the moon, Earth, you know, moon and Earth are kind of one and the same, and Mars and the outer solar system, the belt, how it treats that dynamic. So,
yeah, and that's actually, I'm glad you bring up the Expanse, because I wanted to move in that direction and think about how, or in the direction of how we think about the moon once science fiction pushes not beyond the solar system, but beyond the moon, and maybe also beyond Mars. Because when you think of something like The Expanse, when you think of Kim Stanley Robinson's 2312, those works that are set somewhere between 15 minutes into the future, like the next 50 years, and intergalactic empires that we have light speed or some way around it, and we can get
that are
from
essentially
star to
fantasy,
star. Right? But those works that are set in like colonized solar systems, they're humans on multiple planets, on multiple moons, and you know, when you get into more of those works, it's interesting that a lot of them do treat the Earth and the moon as a single system. And when you think about moons, bodies that are not that can have human populations but are also not planets, they tend to be things like Jupiter's Galilean moons, or Enceladus around Saturn, even...
Enceladus?
Yes.
Is that like a salad?
How do you say it?
Enceladus.
Enceladus around Saturn. I've never said that out loud before.
I am insalidated.
Anyway, but the point stands. Like, you know, and I think that's... As I'm making that observation, I'm wondering, what is it about Earth and the moon that lumps them together as Earth and the moon, and yet allows Europa or Io to stand apart from Jupiter as kind of their own thing, as a moon, but also an emancipated moon, as opposed to...
Well, I mean, we could talk about Jupiter descending, which is...
Oh, go on.
Which is my take on Jupiter Ascending, the movie that made absolutely no sense to anyone. But I actually think encapsulates a lot of what we think and feel about the planet Jupiter. And I do like think about the mythologizing of the planets in the current scientific age as something really, really interesting. We have, or had, I should say, until Cassini dove into Saturn, we got like daily weather reports from 5 different planets in our solar system, which is incredible. Like, never before in human history have we gotten, like, the weather on Mars this morning is sunny and mild with high clouds and, you know, a pressure of, you know, like 1/500th of Earth or whatever. It's incredible. We live in this time of unparalleled, unprecedented data. We have so much data. We have way more data about Mars than we ever did about the moon before we landed there.
Yeah,
and that kind of blows my mind. Like, we are in information overload about our solar system, actually, in terms of being able to act on it. So what we have are these detailed maps of other planets, but no likelihood of ever getting there. And that creates a different kind of mythologizing from I can kind of see a vague blur in the night sky sometimes, so I'm going to make that, this, Mercury retrograde effect on, whatever. I don't know my horoscopes very well, obviously. Yeah. But, the difference between a horoscope approach to the planets and a more fantastical, adventurous, questioning approach to the planets like Jupiter. And Jupiter will never be able to land on. And in fact, despite having information overload about it, we still, we're not going to be able to, settle Jupiter. Not in the way that we could settle Enceladus or Titan or many of these other Saturnian and Jovian moons. So the moons are, in this case, the habitable places. Right. And the planets are the sort of slightly unknowable, but very present, very known actors on the scene. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, because really, what you're saying there is that our scientific understanding, upon which our science fictions are based, allow us to see that the Earth-Moon, planet-moon duality is kind of reversed for all of the outer planets. Like, instead of having habitable planet, uninhabitable moon, for Jupiter you have inhabitable moons, uninhabitable planet. Same thing for Saturn, same thing potentially for Neptune. I'm forgetting my Uranian moons, so I'm not sure there.
I mean, not many people know much about Uranus.
Yeah. But I think that's a really interesting observation that, kind of one of the reasons why the moons, of course, apart from just their potential habitability and the fact that we know so much more scientifically about them, is that they're kind of reversing this Earth-Moon duality that has existed for so many millennia in human thought. Wow, that's really fascinating.
And they're the idea of living in a time of science when we know our unknowables and we know what's unreachable, it makes for a different kind of fraught relationship with whatever your parent planet is. Yeah. So living under the shadow of Saturn's rings, knowing you can never really touch them, knowing you can never really touch your planet, that is a different feeling from living on the large object in your particular duo and looking out at this small moon and wondering, I guess, could we step foot there and then come back? Or, is that a launch pad to something else? It's you're looking out from Earth, but you're not looking up. And I think on these other moons, you're looking up at the planet. Yeah. If you really do put your feet on the surface of Titan, or if you put your feet on the surface of Ganymede, you're looking up at a planet instead of, or down at a planet, perhaps. Right. The notion of gravity wells shifts your perspective, the more you think about it. But you still, a lot about the thing that you're looking at, but you can never get there. And that's actually different from our historic relationship with the moon, where we don't know that much about it and we can't get there.
Right. That idea of directionality, that's a really interesting idea too. And if you've been saying anyway a lot, I've been saying interesting a lot. But thinking about, looking up and seeing the moon and standing or, conceptualizing, imagining what it would be like to stand on a moon and look up at a planet, or to stand on a moon and look down at a planet, and for us to stand on Earth and look down at the moon, I have literally no idea where I'm going with this, but that idea of which direction are we looking, I wonder how much that plays in, like our cultural conception of those celestial bodies.
The most disorienting moment in my recent science fiction reading experience was reading Ancillary Mercy. Is that the third one?
I think so.
Okay, I was reading Ancillary Mercy, and your primary character is going down the gravity well, or thinking about going down a gravity well, and just this immense feeling of being crushed by the enormous gravity of the planet after having been on a satellite, and in this case, a station, an orbital station, for so long. Like the shift in perspective from being in a thing, and feeling pretty self-contained in the thing, and then pointing your feet down at gravity well at something that's solid under your feet and has an atmosphere. Like that was, oh man, I almost felt like, oh no, we can't go back to the planet. It's too much. It's too big. It's too forceful. So inversions can be really pleasant, or they can completely like disorient you. And that is powerful for science fiction. So I wouldn't underestimate the capacity of the moon planet, the moon Earth dynamic to disorient and reinvest our understanding of our relationship with home.
Yeah.
And yes. In Ian McDonald's Luna Wolf Moon especially, but also in the first book in the series, you have this concept of like the lunar equivalent of werewolves. But if you're on the moon, then you're being affected by the Earth's cycles.
Yeah.
And that inversion is perhaps a more mythological one than it is a strictly like gravity and perspective and whatnot one.
Right,
but
right.
It is also important.
Yes.
And something that you couldn't get without having it set on a moon.
Yeah.
Like a planet situation,
right.
Binary planet situation wouldn't work.
Right. Well, speaking of inversion, I have a thought experiment for us.
Ooh.
So let's consider we are where we are right now in terms of science, in terms of what we're reading. Let's say tomorrow there's this discovery that, and I know that this is a thought experiment and it's crazy. Just bear with me. So all of the maybes that we now associate with Mars that science tells us about, science and imagination, I should say. Maybe there was water, possibly oceans, like where's it all gone? Maybe there was life if there was water, etc., etc., etc. What if all of that was transferred to the moon? And suddenly there was this, maybe there was water, maybe there was life, maybe there were oceans, like all of that. What does that do to the moon? Like, how does that change what we think about the moon now?
On a literary level, it would make it a world. Having all of that stuff on the moon would just make it a small world.
Yeah.
Something important about the moon is its inhospitability. And you mentioned that early in the podcast. We haven't really come back to it. But the deadness of the moon is very important to its mythological significance to us now.
Yeah.
Like back once upon a time, maybe less so. But now that we do have the science, now that we've touched foot to the moon, it's kind of like, well, life couldn't ever have been here, really? And so therefore, one of the great mysteries of the universe is still out there, and we need to go to that other great mystery and explore it more. And that is more, that has primacy in the priority list of exploration, space exploration.
Yeah.
And I think it shifts the emotional weight behind the... I mean, you've heard about the, like... This is about a decades-long debate over... Do we go back to the moon first?
Right.
Or do we go to Mars and skip the moon?
Yeah.
Because the infrastructure we're building for the Space Launch System right now could do either. But if we do the moon, then we're not necessarily going to do Mars because it's a less ambitious project and we may not build the infrastructure we need to get to Mars.
Right.
So people advocate aiming for Mars, and that way if you miss, you hit the moon.
Right.
You know, or something like that.
Yeah. Right.
Is it really windy where you are?
No.
Side question.
No. I have the fan on.
I bet it's the fan I'm hearing.
Yeah. Probably.
Anyway, go on.
No, I think that's a good place, actually, maybe to start to wrap up and to think about what we're going to talk about next time and how some of this, well, how thinking about the moon, how thinking about a moon is different from thinking about Mars and other planets. So maybe that's how we can end here as a way to bridge into our next podcast.
Yeah, because I'm envisioning us maybe at long last talking about Kim Stanley Robinson and his Mars trilogy,
Totally.
because so much of contemporary science fiction, or semi-contemporary, I mean, those started in the 80s, but semi-contemporary science fiction set on Mars has to do with transforming it into another Earth.
Yes.
Which you couldn't really do with the moon. So yeah, I'm curious to see where the conversation goes next week and in future weeks as well, as we talk a little bit more about setting in spacefaring science fiction, or non-spacefaring science fiction, I guess, and how that shapes reception and construction of the text.
Yes. Right. Wow. How maybe what we're going to discover next week is that all planets are really just trying to be Earth in science fiction. Maybe that's not what we're going to discover. You can tune in next time.
Question marks.
So why don't you let folks know where they can find us?
Well, you can find me hiding under a rock.
Oh, sad.
And when I'm not hiding under a rock, I am... I never not hide under a rock. So you can find us online at www.imaginaries.net. We are in the process of working on our website at all times and adding new material. And so please do check there for new episodes as well as new thoughts on what we're reading. I'm beginning to think perhaps it'd be a good venue to post book reviews.
That'd be interesting.
Because since I post my book reviews to Goodreads, I might as well post them somewhere that has my copyright stamp on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there will be perhaps more original material going up on our website soon. But in the meantime, you can find most of our original thoughts and speculations, late night shit posts on Twitter. And our handle there is imaginary_pod. And you can also find our individual Twitter handles where you can find them. And that is a very vague way of saying,
True.
If you go to our collective imaginary_pod Twitter handle, our individual links are in the little bio section there. So you can follow the links as far as you like. And you can find our podcast on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on YouTube. And it's free for download, and we hope that, we can keep it that way. So, freedom. I don't know.
Well,
obviously.
I think that is an excellent end. So,
are you cutting me off?
I am not cutting you off. I am logically following what you said with my follow-up to that statement. And on that note, we will see you next time when we venture to Mars and far beyond. So, and goodbye.
Beyond.
Good night.